Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, June 18th, 2025, and today we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And before we get into those questions, I want to give a special shout out to those obviously watching live here on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and obviously those that listen on the audio only podcast or watch on repeat on any of our social channels. Thanks for making SMIE Consulting a part of your weekly international edification. This is one half of what we do each week, free of charge for our international educating community here in the United States and abroad. The other is our newsletter that comes out on Mondays, and that is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. In case you're wondering, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. So those stories are featured in our news story newsletter each Monday. It comes out at 9 a.m. Eastern Time in email form or via LinkedIn at 8:30 a.m. So whichever way you prefer to get your international ed news, please do make it a part of your international news gathering each week. We try and condense the top stories each week into a manageable chunk. We first give you our hot takes in the newsletter on Monday mornings so that you can kind of digest and figure out what's some of the top stories that might be of relevance to you. Usually a 5 to 8 minute read each week to get all news, our hot takes on what those news stories of the day are. And then we cover news, anything from social media stories, which can involve anything online in terms of blogs, in terms of upcoming webinars, AI news, how social media is being used in international education. All of those are fair game for what we'll cover in that section of the newsletter. And then we also have our U.S. Roundup, which covers top stories in big picture news in international ed in the U.S. in terms of what stories, our news stories are kind of the big drivers of information that week. Could be anything from new legislation or new executive orders in the last few months. We've become reaccustomed to what those are and the impacts of those. We talk about solutions that we see percolating through in terms of what folks are doing to kind of counter some of the negatives that we experience regularly in our business. Those are the kind of things we certainly want to make more common. We wish we had more of those stories every week, but usually there's at least three or four, sometimes 7 or 8, depending on the week, of good news stories that we can share. There also is a global roundup where we talk about what's going on in other countries and how other international ed destinations are grappling with the various issues that we face in our field. And that's always something we focus on, at least we try and focus on with SMIE Consulting. Certainly in the newsletter we do that, but again here on Wednesdays, we want to talk about perspective and how important that is with what we do, because so often we are knee deep in what's happening on our campuses, or neck deep, depending on the week, with keeping up with all the impacts of government changes and executive orders and DHS moves and all of the various aspects of changing dynamics in international education. We oftentimes are struggling to manage it all. So I know how it gets. I'm a campus-based international person myself. I've been that way. I work remote, but I work for a university, and I know how busy our days get and how difficult it is to really have the bandwidth to look above the parapet and see what's going on in the wider world and see what issues are happening in Australia, in the UK, in Canada, other major destination countries, other major markets that are trying to become destination for international students. These are the kind of things that I want to bring to my colleagues here on the Roundup and in the newsletter in terms of that perspective and how it can impact how we do what we do in international education. So I posted the links to both the email version of the newsletter as well as the LinkedIn version. And I'm happy to say that between the two, we now have 2,600 subscribers that are catching our international ed news via either the email or LinkedIn versions of the newsletter. So thank you so much for making the SMIE newsletter fit, all that news that's fit to share, part of your weekly international edification. So let's get to our first question of the week. and that is, what is the real impact of the visa interview pause? Now, what was promised to be a few days at the beginning of NAFSA week, on the Tuesday of NAFSA, right after Memorial Day, we were told that this would be, nothing, just a procedural issue that we're trying to get in place for all the consulates and embassies around the world in terms of how they're going to do social media, extreme social media vetting, which has been promised. That was the rationale for why they were doing it, when they were doing it. Couldn't have done that in January or February when there really aren't the major issues with visa interview crunches. That would have made the most sense. But as with many things in this administration, we're often left guessing and trying to keep up and catching our breath and in reaction mode rather than being proactive for how we respond. So what we're talking about here is with this visa pause, visa interview pause, which was one of the more poorly worded diplomatic cables that have come out of the State Department to post in quite a while. It basically said we want to pause on new interview capacity at consulates and posts around the world. Some consulates took that to mean stop all your interviews altogether, and now it's been over 3 weeks. Others have seen it as well, just not adding anything additional in terms of capacity into July or August for new visa appointments. So what this means for the pause has been interpreted differently, but the point of the pause was to give consulates and embassies a chance to know what these new social media vetting policies were supposed to be. Now, has that actually happened? I've just gotten back from Greece, where I was attending a language summit, and we were fortunate enough to have folks from the U.S. Embassy come by and talk to the folks who were gathered there for the summit, but also answer some questions amongst the 6 or 7 of my U.S. colleagues that were at the summit. And she knew about as much as we did, and unfortunately, she's not on the visa side, doesn't do the interviews. The consular chief really doesn't make that a high priority at the embassy there. So I asked the questions that all of you would want to ask. Well, how have you interpreted this social media vetting? Who is doing that? What is happening? What does that mean? What does that look like? She didn't know any of the details, and that may be very commonplace. In some countries, I'm sure it's more of an issue than others. But these are the kinds of concerns that we have as international educators, and certainly those, anytime we have chances to meet with consular folks, trying to get a straight answer out of them oftentimes is hard because they're scripted like most of government officials. There's only certain things that they can say or not say. But so it was certainly clear in terms of the pause, that has caused a lot of uncertainty too. They weren't sure exactly what that meant, but they haven't, that just meant new capacity to them. So in terms of where they go from there, there's a lot of different pieces of that puzzle that are still unclear. I'm sure they're not the only post around the world that is dealing with these very significant issues. So in terms of what the visa pause actually means and what we can say authoritatively about what happens and what's happening out in the field, we know that there are students who are asking about deferments. And when we keep hearing it's only going to be a matter of days. Last week on Tuesday, State Department spokesman Tammy Bruce said we expect this to be cleared by the end of the week. It wasn't. She said the same thing the week before. Now we're 3 weeks in and we're in the middle of a war with, or Israel's in the middle of a war with Iran, and we may or may not be getting involved and lending support and all of those wonderful things that truly complicate our lives and the lives of those impacted in those countries. And obviously we're dealing with one of the countries, Iran now, that was added to this travel ban list in the last couple of weeks. So we already knew that they were, it's always been a tough road for an Iranian student who wants to come for a degree in the U.S. in terms of security clearances. Administrative processing oftentimes takes well over a year to 2 years to get done. So the start times for many of these students that are looking to come to study in the United States is often much longer than it should be. And now all of a sudden, whereas Trump travel bans 1.0 in the first administration all had exemptions carved out for students to allow those students to still come. They are not included. There are no exceptions for students in any of the travel ban countries that were outlined 2 weeks ago. So we're left wondering what is happening now with the travel ban and the visa interview, not necessarily the travel ban, but the visa interview pause. Iran obviously is most directly impacted. State Department is obviously involved in trying to, in peace negotiations for Russia's war in the Ukraine, and now is doing all they can to avoid World War III breaking out in the Middle East with the Israel-Iran war. So normally the question got asked in the State Department briefings on Tuesdays, hey, where are we with the visa interview pause resolution? And as far as I can tell from any news stories that have come out, that wasn't addressed yesterday in Tuesday's briefing. So we're still dealing with that. And when is a resolution expected? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows, and until it happens, we'll just keep holding our breath. And sadly, the students that we're trying to bring in for the fall that have been waiting to see if they need to defer their admission or not because it's getting too late and they're not sure if they're going to be able to get a visa interview in time to come in August or early September, depending on the university. We are in a situation where we don't know what exactly is going to happen next and when this whole situation gets resolved. What was told to be a few days now is turning in 3 weeks, and by the middle of next week, we're going to be hitting a month. So the timing couldn't be worse, and we talked about this before. That of all the times to have a visa pause, this time of the year when the greater majority of students are going for their visas is the worst possible time to have a visa pause. We have a couple news stories I'll be dropping the links to in the chat. We first have the issue of it's a pause to allow for consulates to deal with how they will be doing social media vetting, what that looks like, who does it, what the procedures will be. We now have the consequence of that is articles popping in India in particular. Foreign students are scrubbing social media as U.S. expands visa vetting. So no surprise there that students are not dummies. They know that they need to be pretty savvy on these things, and we're seeing there be a real reaction to this, and we know how valuable an opportunity coming to the United States to study is for some students around the world that have been waiting to apply for years and have now gotten to the point where they've applied, they've been accepted, they've got their I-20s, they're ready to apply for their visa, but now they have this complication here about social media vetting and what that looks like. So what we are expecting, and we see it happening, it's being reported on in India, one of our top markets, that students are scrubbing their social media history to take out things that are anti-American or anti-Trump or anti-Israel or any of the things that the administration has expressed concerns about and have said that they are vetting existing international students in the United States for, checking their social media to see if they should be allowed to stay. Now students in other countries, before they go for the visas, are getting that put on at the top of their list of things they need to check before they go for their interview. And for some people, it's also, it might be a little bit too late if they wait until after they've scheduled their interview to start scrubbing. They actually need to do that before they fill out their DS-160, because that's where they put their social media handles that allow state to do the actual vetting. So that will happen as soon as they fill out that DS-160 up until the time that they go for their visa interview. That's when that visa social media vetting can happen. So when students do that, they should obviously do that before they fill out that DS-160 where they make their social media handles public. But that's one consequence of the ban. We also see the timing on this is terrible because between May and August, this is when the numbers reflect 70% of international students go for their visa appointments. 70% inside the May to August window, that's when students apply for their visas. Greater majority of students that come to the U.S. come in the fall. and this is their time to get that visa appointment secured. So another 20% or so, 25% apply for January term, and the other 5 to 10% are at various points in the year that are coming for other statuses that might get their I-20s super early. But in terms of where we are telling our students not to defer yet, because the timing of this, there's still, and in key markets, the new capacity was, and particularly in India, they had already put 2,000 new appointments into the system before this pause was put in place. So they were already into July and probably early August before the pause came down. Not sure exactly, but that's what we've been told on the ground. The Karen Fisher article from last week was also particularly relevant, that talked about why this is the most damaging time of year to restrict student visas. That we do need to be aware of these kind of things, and the government certainly doesn't exist and know our systems, know our calendars, our timelines, and as a result, we often fall down the priority list, and clearly have, with the Israel-Iran war popping in and occupying the majority of the leadership of State Department that is responsible for the visa interview pause and its implementation or release of that implementation. So Karen Fisher's article certainly covers a lot of those details that on the I-20s that we talk about. So we're looking at 7 in 10 visas have been issued during the 4 critical months, May through August, except during the pandemic. So the wait times were already an issue in a lot of countries, and certainly in Africa they're getting pretty bad there. So we'll see what happens next with that. Now, in terms of other details related to the visa pause, there's even those prognosticators at study portals has said that the Trump effect here could be worse than the pandemic in terms of what this pause means. So we'll see what that looks like. I'll be sharing the briefing from last Tuesday that talked about, well, they expected it to be resolved by the end of the week. I'll be putting that link in the chat too. So there's so much new news each week, and it's really hard to keep it all straight. And that's why we spend so much time with the newsletter, kind of laying it all out for you. And hopefully you have a chance to see that. But going back to the Trump effect could be worse than COVID, sector leaders warn. Pi News article in which they interviewed a number of well-known folks in the profession, have their fingers on the pulse. We've seen drops in international student interest, and we're going to cover this in a minute or two in our second question. But we certainly see a lot of red flags starting to develop. A lot of us kind of saw this coming, that this would be a very trying 4 years. We thought there might be some shoots of interest that might give us some hope, that there might be more interest or opportunities for some positives, but we're not seeing that. So in terms of the Trump effect, could be worse than COVID. That link I'll drop in the chat as well. And then we also have a couple things coming up that we'll share with you. And I always, I know I talk about this regularly on the channel here, is we need to, what do our students want? And that's really the focus of where we'll move to now, because we're dealing with the impacts of the visa pause. We're dealing with daily inquiries from students about what they should do. Should they wait? Just hopefully have it cleared up in the next few days, or do they defer to the spring? There are very real impacts for our campuses in terms of what volume we can expect. Most of us were expecting, if we were to keep up with where we were last fall, we'd be lucky, and probably are now ratcheting back our expectations to perhaps enjoy less full class than we might have hoped or might have expected pre-visa pause. So all of this impacts student interest, and that's something we've seen in a couple of different surveys. And there's been a couple of webinars recently. There's a webinar that was held, or is it being held actually today. It was held as soon as we're done here at 2 o'clock. It's an IDP webinar. Just dropped the link to that in the chat. It's a U.S. student sentiment survey looking at the May-June time period. It's a follow-up to their pre- and post-election surveys from earlier in the year and last year. And the focus today is timely insights on student motivations and perspectives on the latest political environment, and discuss implications of the survey results. Now that one is going to be, like I said, that webinar is at 2 p.m. Eastern time today on Wednesday. There was also last week, there was a study portals webinar with NAFSA, and that talked about the shifting sands again, real-time insights on shifting international student interest in the U.S. A large percentage, more than a third of some U.S.-bound survey respondents said they are planning to defer their U.S. study plans. Nearly another third say they no longer wish to study in America. Wow. A third of U.S.-bound survey respondents said they are no longer wishing to study in America. That hurts. That really hurts. And it's a cumulative effect of all the negative news that's been coming down. It's the travel bans on top of the visa pause, on top of the China stuff with the visas. But now that's turning around, that there may be hope for China now with the trade deal looming. So this the ISIF webinar that was held a week or two ago does talk about some of those real shifts, policy shifts, and the negative impact of it. IDP folks on that, study portals folks on that panel, ISIF folks, so Keystone as well. They had a relatively small sample size that they're talking a 52% decline in study interest between May 24 and May 25 in the U.S. Study portals had a similar 40 to 50% drop last month as well in the U.S. So we are seeing the impact of this. So we should not be surprised that this is happening. But we see it's a real consequence of government that is taking anything international, and particularly inbound international, and making it increasingly difficult, making the hoops that students have to jump through much smaller and many more of them, and that makes it harder to go through. But so many do still have that dream, and regardless of who's in the White House, they still want to come. Like those students that are busy scrubbing their social media accounts, trying to stave off potential visa denial for another reason that they'll never understand and won't be told in an interview. So the uncertainty is out there, and it's real, and it's not just on campus. It is with every prospective student that's looking to come to the United States right now. And though as much as we like to keep positive, many of my colleagues who have been negative Nancys for since day one are enjoying themselves, proving themselves being right, enjoying that they were predicting the doom and downfall of our profession. I don't think it's as bad as that yet, but the signs are more negative than positive in these summer months. That is the most critical time, and things that are disrupting the normal flow of students to us are ones that we have to be concerned about, because they impact our bottom line and impact our future messaging and how we can and should talk about our institutions, about our country, and how we do that in a reasoned way without over politicizing what we do. And that's something we shouldn't do anyway on our campuses, because too many people are watching what we say, and even if your campus is in the bluest of blue states, you don't want to draw attention necessarily to things that are overly critical of this government. I mean, that's a sad reality, and that sad reality drives some of my colleagues absolutely crazy, and rightly so, because it's against everything we believe in, that we should have to watch everything we say because we feel the government's going to come after us. And that level of fear and suspicion for our government and what it can and can't do is troubling. It's really troubling. So I do tend to be that positive guy, and look for that silver lining. And it's increasingly harder, no doubt, to find that silver lining. And but the conversations I have with students when I'm traveling, when I'm responding to messages, those messages from them, there's a vast majority that still want to come. We make it increasingly hard on ourselves sometimes, and not through our faults in terms of what we do on a campus level, but what the government does. And it's a reality that puts a lot of my colleagues on a path that is not a very dark, not a very light one, not a very positive one. And it's hard not to, and that's not to get negative. But the reality is we need to all be able to take a step back and work with what we have. And we've not got a great hand right now, but the reality is it is the one we've been dealt, and we need to help our future students and our current students navigate some challenging waters right now. And we do that not by decrying everything that the government does in public forums and all of that, which we should be advocating for our students, should be advocating for our profession, but doing so constructively and to those that can listen and can influence decisions. This is where I know we all need to vent. I have my moments talking with colleagues off in private about what's really going on, and the conversations have not gotten easier in the last couple of months. But we all have our private venting we need to do to be able to deal with the frustrations we have, and that's something that is very real and ever present in our jobs at this point. Now let's get on to our last question of the day, and that is one that is a consequence of all the negative energy that we're seeing directed our way by this government, and that is which countries will benefit most from big four slips. So it's not just us, and I take some solace. It's not a lot, but I do take some solace in knowing that the UK, Canada, Australia have all imposed self-inflicted wounds on themselves, international education-wise, in the last couple of years, and we need to be aware of those, and that we need to know that in Canada there have been thousands of layoffs in higher education as a result of the layoffs or the caps that the government has put in place in the last 2 years for new international students. We have programs closing, we have budgets slashed, we have certainly at NAFSA, the booth that was there at the end of May was about half the size of its original intent before all these budget cuts started impacting participants. We see Australia dealing with governments that is maybe the lesser of two evils in terms of what the impact is on international education, but still intent on imposing more significant restrictions. We've already seen higher English language requirements, higher financial requirements, higher visa fees. All of these things have been imposed, and there are caps, percentage caps potentially per institution in terms of how many international students they can have or are allowed to, new ones to enroll. So that's happening. In the UK, we've seen a cut to the graduate route, which may or may not be as impactful as first thought in terms of its impact on future students. But we see all of us have UK, Canada, Australia, US, Canada, Australia, UK. Yeah, we see who's benefiting from it, and other than where we see there are two kind of powers or bases that are growing, and we see mainland Europe growing. We've seen France, Germany, even Finland growing significantly in the last few years, and they're seeing growth. They're also seeing issues that we're seeing in the U.S. and some of the Western democracies out in Asia are seeing in terms of mature countries with an aging industrial and aging domestic populations that are seeing fewer high school graduates. We're seeing that in the U.S. in the next 4 or 5 years, and that means we need to fill those jobs with folks because we don't have enough of them domestically to do that, so we need internationals. Other countries are devising policies to make that an easier process. In Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan, in Germany, they're doing that. In Finland, they're doing that by putting in work benefits that are substantial, on par, or if not stronger, than creating those pathways to residency and work after study. and making it a much easier, more inviting process than we have here in the United States. So there's three different articles about some of the Asian tigers that are going to benefit most. We see East Asia and Europe really coming to the fore. There's an Asian tigers ramp up their interest in internationalization amongst our big four woes. The Pie News article there, and that the curbs on Chinese students, whether or not those actually happen or not, the trade deal seems to indicate that that's coming. That maybe that won't be as significant in terms of Rubio's statement. He wants to aggressively revoke Chinese student visas. That Chinese students will again be welcome. It's hard to keep our heads about us these days. They're spinning so much in terms of which way is the wind blowing and impacting how we feel about our days, and that can change from hour to hour sometimes. But there's a great concern amongst many of my colleagues in the field that there are so many challenges these days that we seem to be becoming deprioritized as in terms of the economy, in terms of the government, in terms of support. So we need each other more than ever. We can't be infighting amongst ourselves. We have to rally together as a profession and advocate as much as we can, not only to our elected officials, but manage up and advocate up. Most of us have had the conversations with senior leadership on our campuses about the impact of all these cumulative government decisions and executive orders and bans and pauses. These have very real consequences on our enrollments and our current students' feelings about staying. So we have to protect our students. That's our jobs. And we get very defensive, and sometimes that defensiveness comes out wrong in terms of interpersonal communication skills. Have really been challenged, I think, by a lot of the frustrations we're all feeling, and I feel them too. But being able to step back and take a beat, and sometimes two or three beats, and try and process everything and find a level-headed solution, which seems at odds with everything that we're hearing from the government, that is the rub. So it's no easy feat, and certainly we need to be communicating with each other on how we're handling this, and sharing best practices on things that are working on our campuses. So I certainly encourage you all to do that. But that's all we have for this week on the Roundup. Look forward to chatting with you again in a week's time, and hopefully we'll have some brighter news. So until then.